lots of y'all probably know this, but in case you don't, I am mentally ill. I don't mean I'm crazy, I'm such a kooky character. No. I live with social anxiety disorder, I live with clinical depression, and I live with hypochondria. That's fine. One of my favorite phrases is it's okay to not be okay. I didn't always know that, though. Education about mental illness has gotten better, and as it gets better, more people get diagnosed. Even though there's still a really dishearteningly high number of estimated undiagnosed mentally ill folks. But as more people get diagnosed, more people get comfortable with the idea of mental illness and living with mental illness, and the stigma against the mentally ill gets eroded. And then it kind of snowballs from there. Stigma erodes, more people get diagnosed because they're less afraid of that stigma. And then as more people get diagnosed, the stigma will inevitably erode even more. I think that's really important. I think talking about mental illness is important. This is part of why Gami is probably the thing in my life, the project that I undertake on a yearly basis that I am most proud of. And y'all deserve that same pat on the back for Gami as well, because you helped to make it so tremendous and so successful and such a heartwarming thing. And even those who can't donate, you show up and you share your stories and you normalize mental illness. And that's what it needs to be. It needs to be normal. Stigma stands in opposition to that. Stigma is that societal feeling that it's abnormal to have something wrong in your head, or that mentally ill people are exclusively unstable and dangerous, or that disorders of the mind are less valid in some way than physical ailments. And none of that's true. And that's why dispelling stigma is so important. I'm gonna tell y'all something. I already said everything that I suffer from. I only found out all of that when I was about 20. Like, I only got diagnosed when I was 20. Like, I didn't become suddenly socially anxious or depressed or a hypochondriac when I hit 20. I had been that. I had no words for it, though. I had no treatments. I had crude, barely effective coping mechanisms. You know what I thought? I thought that I was broken. I thought I was defective. I didn't know that there was a better way to feel about myself. And I felt like that all my life. 20 years, more or less, by that point. Those things were with me like stowaways, hiding out in my mind, telling me I wasn't as good as other people, that I couldn't do things, that I wouldn't ever be able to accomplish anything, that I would be a failure. These tiny, trivial things would send me into like full-blown spirals of anxiety to the point where I couldn't function as like a human being. So I would just avoid doing stuff. I would avoid doing anything that I hadn't done before in front of people, and that meant that I limited myself. I limited my ability to learn things, even simple, basic things. And the more I avoided doing things and learning things, the more I dreaded making mistakes. And it meant the older that I got, without having so many of those experiences, that the idea of being older and not knowing how to do certain things, like that I could have learned at a younger age, made me even more anxious. And I wanted to avoid that stuff even more. And it became this bad spiral. My depression would feed my anxiety, and my anxiety would feed my depression, and I would notice like little things wrong that had probably always been there. Like, I would notice like a little twinge of pain one day and then suddenly go, oh my God, I must have cancer. And I would Google my symptoms and I would convince myself and I would just have panic attacks. Oh, it was a bad time. And looking back, like I can laugh at it, but I was not laughing back then. I was not. They were these little imps that I carried every day. And I didn't think that other people were like that. I thought that other people had baseline happiness that was up here and mine was, down here. The analogy that I've grown pretty fond of in recent years is that it's like trudging through mud in a bog that is up to your chest. And I didn't realize why the mud was up to my chest. But once I started getting treatment, once I was diagnosed and started coping with it in a more healthy way and getting treatment, the mud was maybe down to my ankles. And that's a more healthy baseline. But I thought that the mud was always supposed to be up to my chest, that I was just like that. That was just that. I was defective and there was nothing to be done. I had heard of mental illness, but for the longest time, I thought, oh, I can't be mentally ill. Only dangerous people are mentally ill, because that's, like, if you read the news or watch the news or whatever, that's pretty much exclusively when we talk about mental illness. In, like, the cultural zeitgeist, that's when we talk about mental illness, when somebody does something atrocious. So, you kind of draw that link, that unconscious link between, like, oh, mentally ill people or people, like, when I was growing up, would have been like the Unabomber or the kids who shot up Columbine or somebody who committed some kind of atrocity. They can't be right, so obviously they're abnormal, they're aberrations. They have to be mentally ill to do that. And that's the only time we talked about mental illness. Made you think that mentally ill people were just scary and unhinged and a danger to society. So you're not like that, right? I'm not like that. So clearly I'm not mentally ill. And if I'm not mentally ill, then, hey, there's nothing that can be done about the fact that the mud is up to my chest. That's just how I am. I was born defective. Oh, it was bad. And even when I learned more about psychology and mental health, and keep in mind, I'm young. Like, I'm an older millennial, but I'm still pretty young. So even in the 90s, even in the early aughts, even in the 2010s, even now, public societal understanding of mental health is not, and especially was not, amazing. So even when I learned more about this stuff, I was still hesitant about admitting that I'm ill and I need to see a doctor for treatment, until it was too much. Until one day, I convinced myself that I had Parkinson's because I came back from a flight and my hands were a little bit unsteady. Mind you, this was the first time I had ever traveled, on my own no less, across the country and back. I came back, my hands were a little bit unsteady. And in my mind, I went, oh God, that's really bad. Is that Parkinson's? I better look up Parkinson's symptoms and go, oh, yep, got that. Yep, that checks out. I got Parkinson's. Oh God. Whew. I had a massive panic attack. And that was the tipping point. That was the point where I went, I cannot just tough this out anymore. I cannot just try to push through this on my own. I cannot just use these kind of poor coping strategies that I developed. I have to seek actual treatment. I have to at least ask a doctor, am I okay? Is this how I'm supposed to be? Can I be better? I remember being at PAX once and going to one of the Penny Arcade Q&As, and something that Jerry Holkins said. Jerry and Mike are the founders of Penny Arcade, and they struggle with some similar mental illnesses that I do. And he said, and I will never forget this, never underestimate the extent to which you can feel better. Of course, that seems obvious, but I spent a lifetime not doing that. I spent a lifetime underestimating how much better I could feel. It has been 8 years since I first saw a doctor. About 8 years, right? Oh god, the timeline's getting blurry in my head. It's been 8 years since I first saw a doctor and started really treating my mental illness. And my only regret is how long it took. If you take nothing else away from this, know that if you suffer or if you cope with mental illness, no matter what type, that isn't a personal failing on your part. You can get better. There's treatment out there. You aren't alone. That is so important. You are not alone. Please know that. Not by a long shot. Mental illness is every bit as common as physical illness, and it is just as valid. I'm mentally ill, and that's fine. A lot of you are too, and y'all, that is okay.